Hi, I'm Brett Johnson, former United States Most Wanted cyber criminal, now good guy, and host of The Brett Johnson Show. Today's episode is episode number 83. It's an AnglerPhish podcast flashback, part 15, Looking for Love in All the Wrong Places. When we come back. I get the worst parts from my mom and my dad. From my mom, I get that criminal mindset. From dad, I get that fear of being abandoned, of the people I love leaving me. It's the story of my life. I faked a car accident to get the money to get married. Of course, I didn't tell my wife-to-be, Susan, that little fact. I told her I'd been in an accident. That was the first of many lies. I lied to Susan for the entire 9 years of our marriage. The first 2 to 3 years consisted of me lying so that she wouldn't find out I was a criminal. That ended when I was arrested for telemarketing charity fraud, and then visits from law enforcement concerning the victims I had scammed online. No way to lie to Susan from that point about me being a crook, so the next 6 years were lies of, I've stopped, I'm going to stop, I will stop, it's not that serious, just a little while longer. All lies. And we were married for 9 years. In that entire 9 years span, the only real conversation we had was when the marriage ended. I can't think of a single worthwhile talk we had while we were married. Looking back now, I know it's because of those lies. How do you converse with someone that's a liar? Welcome to the AnglerPhish podcast, where we visit the darkest corners of our online lives. I'm your host, Brett Johnson. The United States Secret Service called me the original Internet Godfather. Now, what does it take to get a title like that? 39 felonies, a place on the United States Most Wanted list, an escape from prison, and I built the first organized cybercrime community, ShadowCrew. ShadowCrew was a precursor to today's darknet and darknet markets, and it laid the foundation for the way modern cybercrime channels still operate today. This first season of the AnglerPhish podcast tells of my rise and fall as the world's first Internet Godfather. It's a fascinating story. You'll learn how cybercriminals think, how modern cybercrime came into being, and why it's so successful and hard to stop, and how I was able to turn from a life of crime to one of using the knowledge I acquired as a criminal to help protect others against the type of person I used to be.
Brett, in the news, there's all kinds of election stuff going on.
Election stuff?
Yeah, and we got a president that's on the hot seat right now about his involvement with Ukrainians.
Sure.
Putting political pressure on. That brings up a subject that I'm curious about, and that is interference from other countries with our voting system.
Oh. Ooh.
Now,
well, you're opening up a can of worms there, aren't you?
Yeah. What kind of light can you shed on us? If you want to.
Well, sure. I mean, we can. That's something we'll talk about in a different episode as we carry on. But just to give my viewpoint on that, and I'm kind of apolitical more than anything. I hate both parties. I belong to the party of Johnson.
There you go. I get it. I belong to the Ken Allen party.
There you go. And my thing is we have this thing, or we've had this in the United States. The government's practiced this thing called the Monroe Doctrine, which basically says we own South America and we will control whatever we want to down there. So for many years, they messed with whatever election they wanted to down there, but not just in South America, worldwide. And we're seeing now that it's happening to us. And not that it hasn't been, it's been happening, right? But the problem, of course, is that the Russian government has gotten extremely good with understanding that idea that I keep talking about of the perception of truth is more important than the truth itself. It doesn't matter. It does not matter what's real. It doesn't matter what the facts are. It matters what you can convince someone of. So if you look at a financial cybercrime level, that becomes, oh, can I convince a merchant that I'm somebody else? Can I convince a merchant that I'm you when I'm using your credit card? Well, that's at a very low level. But if you extrapolate that to the higher degrees, can I convince a nation that someone else should be elected? Can I skew an election? Because the perception of truth is more important than truth itself. And I don't care. I really don't care what you think about Donald Trump. Do you think he's a genius? Some people do. Do you think he's a fucking idiot? Some people do.
That's right.
All right? It doesn't matter what you think. It matters what you can convince the masses of. And like it or not, Donald Trump embraces that. He embraces that. He understands that idea. It doesn't matter what the facts are. It matters what I say and what people believe.
Right.
But we'll talk about that. You know, this episode's not really supposed to be about that. But
no, I realize that, but I'm thinking voter tampering, programming a series of voting machines.
Sure. Now, certainly you can do that, all right? And here's the issue with that, all right? You're talking about tampering with voter machines.
Right.
Sure, you can do that. Absolutely you can. And that's been shown time and time again at these hacker conferences like Black Hat, DEF CON, everything else. Certainly you can do that. But here's the issue with that. Why would you do that when the only thing you need to do is just simply deploy some of these social engineering techniques of skewing the collective? You use Facebook. Use Facebook to put out enough fake news articles about the Democrats being pedophiles. Are you going to vote for a pedophile? Are you really going to do that? No, you're not.
Right.
So it becomes all of a sudden the lesser of two evils. You may not like Donald Trump, but are you going to vote a pedophile into office, somebody that hurts children? It's that type of skewing that's much more effective. Much more effective.
Exactly right. Alabama is a great example of convincing a whole bunch of people that, well, you know, so what? She's done this or that,
right,
or he's done this or that. They believe in the Lord, so I'm voting for them.
That's it.
Like,
they're Christian. Yeah. Roy Moore.
Oh God! Shit, man, that guy.
He's crazy. He absolutely is. Sociopaths. And in my opinion, I'm not a medical professional.
Nope.
But in my opinion, that dude fits the bill right there.
Yep. Ditto.
And I'm not going to say anything about him maybe liking young girls or anything else like that, because that's not been proven. But, you know, there's a lot of news out there that reports about this kind of stuff on it.
Yep.
And the only thing I can do is read the articles. But instead of going down that rabbit hole, we will do that in a future episode, because I think that's needed.
In fact, we might wait till after the election to do that one.
Or the impeachment.
Or the impeachment. The impending impeachment.
Because it looks more likely every day right now.
Yeah, well, we know what an impeachment can do. It can embarrass somebody.
That's
Some
about
people.
it. That's about it.
But if you're a sociopath, it doesn't embarrass you.
Right. And I don't think anything's going to happen with that, and I don't think he does either.
I don't think so.
There you go.
Anyway.
But
I was curious. So.
Well, I may have talked more than I was supposed to, and a little bit out of the side of my mouth on that one too. But
have to talk to the editor and see what he can cut.
Well, I say we let it ride.
Okay.
But it was. I was thinking. We've talked a lot about the criminal activity, and the ShadowCrew story and all that. We've talked very little about the stuff that was going on in personal life at the same time. And I was married to Susan. I've talked about her and how I shouldn't have married her, how I loved her, but I shouldn't have married her. And I mentioned that in the prologue, I lied to her for 9 years, man. We were married for 9 years.
9 years. Now, that's 20% of your life.
I was married to her for 20% of my life. And during that 20%, we never, and I mean this, we never carried on a real conversation. And that's that, and I knew that the entire 9. It was weird to me. We never talked about anything. We would talk about movies and TV and maybe the books we were reading or games we were playing or something like that. But a real meaningful conversation, It never happened for 9 years until the marriage fell apart at that point. And what brought that on? Well, it was my lies, of course. Probably 3 years were me hiding my criminal activity from her. And I was not good about hiding that. I did this charity fraud stuff. I got arrested, spent 3 months in the county jail for that. Got out, and then I started doing pirated software and all this other stuff and scams on eBay, and police start showing up. So that lie did not last very long. It took her 3 years to really accept that I was a criminal, is what happened. She wanted to deny it. Because she did love me. She did. I have no doubt about that. She loved me. But she didn't want to admit that her husband was a no-good scoundrel. So it took her 3 years to come to that conclusion. The next 6 years were me trying to tell her, I've stopped. I will stop. I'm not doing that anymore. I'm going to quit just a little while longer. It's not that serious. The only people who are losing money are banks. And she got to the point where she liked spending the money. She did, but she had much more of a moral compass than I had. She knew what was right and what was wrong, and she cared about it. I knew what was right and what was wrong. I just didn't care. I was going to keep breaking the law, and I needed to justify that. And I used her as justification. I have to provide for us. I'm the breadwinner. You want to live, don't you? Mm-hmm. So that was the justification. And where it started to fall apart, I hadn't taken a vacation. I was on a computer for, 16, 18 hours a day at that point. And I was stealing a lot of money. The money was coming in. So I told Susan, I was like, look, I said, why don't we take 2 weeks? I won't touch a computer for 2 weeks. I'll put somebody else in charge. I'll call in every now and then. They can tell me what's going on. We'll go down to Orlando. We'll hit Disney. We'll stay at the resort there. We'll hit Universal for a week, Disney for a week. We'll just take some time off. And she was like, let's do that. Well, at the same time, she had wanted me to get her a computer. She was never big on computers or anything like that. So she wanted a computer. So I stole her from Dell, because Dell's where you go to get computers if you're a thief, as well as a real person. I'm a legitimate person now, and I still buy Dell instead of stealing them. But I carded her a $6,000 Dell desktop computer. So she started being on the computer pretty often. She signed on to one of these forum sites called IGN, which is an electronics game site and everything else. It's still around today. And she was really active on the forums there. So we go to Orlando, and she got to where she wanted. We didn't take any laptops with us or anything like that. She wanted to go to Kinko's of a night to start, to touch base with the forums. And I'm like, I'll drop you off at Kinko's. You do whatever you want to. When do you want me to pick you back up? And it was usually about an hour and a half, something like that. Well, I didn't know that it wasn't the forums that she was talking about. She was chatting with this dude, was what it was. She had found a guy that was giving her more attention than I was, and she was trying to become romantically involved with him. And it took so we came back from Orlando, and I found out about it. I forgot how I actually found out, but I found out about it. And there were tears on her side and crying and everything else. And as far as I was concerned, we fixed it. Just don't do it again. Everything's fine. I understand. I'll take some more time off of work. I understand what the problem is. Don't worry about it. Well, 2 months later, and here's the thing. I grew up in a home where my mom cheated religiously on my father. So I have a hyper sense of awareness.
And openly.
Openly. But I have a really hyper sense of awareness on that. I know if something is off, simply because of the childhood that I had. I know that. So I started noticing with Susan, she'd come to bed late. I'd go to bed, and she'd come to bed after me a few hours. It's a little odd, but okay. I'd walk by the computer where she was on, and she would minimize the screen. Okay. All this other stuff, and it kept going. I'm like, something's going on.
Yeah.
So I got up early one morning. I was up early most of the time anyway. I got up early one morning, and I put tracking software on our computer. Let's find out what the hell you're doing. All right. Let it go for 2 days. 2 days later, come back, check and see what the software has found. I found out that she was not only talking to another guy, not the same one, but a different one altogether, but she was cheating on me. She had been, sleeping with him, having sex. She had been sending him videos and pictures and everything else. And she'd been talking about, not only that, but she'd been talking about the criminal activity that I was engaged in. So it was like a complete betrayal. So I sat there that morning and I was like, what the hell? So she was asleep. After about an hour and a half of me sitting there just staring at it, I get up, walk into the bedroom, open up the closet, get out a suitcase, start packing her clothes. She wakes up. Where are you going? I looked at her and I was like, I'm not going anywhere. You are. So she's like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, well, I found out about the guy you're cheating with. Now here's the thing. I really believe, looking back now, I believe that she knew that was the only way that she could get away. I really believe that. I think she understood that if it would have been anything else, that I would have been, no, let's work it out. But because of my mom, that history that I had with her cheating on my dad and everything else, that was the absolute line in the sand right there. Now, whether she knew that consciously or subconsciously, I don't know. But we broke up at that point. I did not take her back to Eastern Kentucky at that point. We were in Charleston, South Carolina. It actually took a week to do the breakup. And I went through that. If that first day was just me being angry, was what that was. By the end of the first day, it got into just depressed. I was walking around the house literally in a stupor, crying constantly, but I knew it was over. There was no fixing it. You've got to go. That was it. And of course she was crying, everything else. So it took about 5 days to work through that. I had a Mini Cooper. I went and rented a big truck to put all of her stuff in. She called her mom and told her she was coming home. Told her mom she was coming home. And her mom, of course, they knew I was a criminal, and they were happy to hear it.
Yeah.
And so I loaded up all of Susan's stuff and drove that 7 hours to Eastern Kentucky, to Hazard, and dropped her off at the house. And on the way there, I had the first real conversation I had ever had with my wife in 9 years. Talked about the abuse that I had had as a child, the type of life that I'd had, why I thought that I broke the law. Just a real conversation. Now, was it full of bullshit, me telling lies about why I broke the law, justifying? Probably. But for that point in my life, it was the first real conversation I'd ever had with Susan. Ever. And I told her that. I was like, this is the first time I think we've ever talked. And she's like, yeah, I think it is. But that's the last time I saw her, was at that point. I come home, and I'm in that daze. The reason I commit crime is because I'm scared of losing the people around me, so I have to buy that love, right? I have to just buy them. It's not enough for me to tell somebody I love them. I have to show it through gifts, or show it through all the work I do, or something like that. So I was going through the house and just constantly crying, and I started to get suicidal. I didn't want to live anymore, and realized I was getting suicidal. So I pick up the damn phone book and start going through the yellow pages for psychologists. Find me a psychologist. Find it under criminal psychology. It was the only one listed in the yellow pages under criminal psychology. And I was like, I probably need that. So I forgot the doctor's name. I keep wanting to call the doctor Catherine Martin, but that's the doc's name from Hannibal Lecter's Silence of the Lambs.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I don't remember what the doctor's name was, but I called her, and I was crying, and I told her, I was like, man, I need to see somebody. And she told me, she was like, come in right now. So I was like, okay. Bawling like a baby. So I go in, and I tell her everything. Tell her, I'm this criminal. This is what I've done. My wife left me. I don't know what to do. And I saw that psychologist for about 4 months, and I told her everything. You know, I told her the type of childhood I had, the type of criminal activity I was doing, everything else. And she was more intent on trying to get me to stop breaking the law than anything. Mm-hmm. So she kept trying to talk me into going into real estate. And I kept joking, is there a difference? But she did some good, man. It got me to open up. It's the first time I'd ever talked about any of that stuff, any of it, to anyone. You know, so I would leave. I'd cry. Of course, I'd cry during every session. I saw her once a week, and I'd cry during every session. But I'd leave there feeling good. You know, it felt clean when I'd leave, you know.
I guess it's like the Catholics going to confession.
Yeah, I mean, it helps to get that stuff out, to be able to cleanse yourself, you know. Mm-hmm. What happened, Ken, was I had never been to a strip club before. And I didn't start drinking until I was 34, until Susan leaves. So I started seeing this psychologist, and I'd never had friends. I had associates, had never had friends. So I'd been a stage actor, and I decided, you know, it's time I get out and start trying to do something other than just sitting at the house breaking the law and being sad. So I signed on for some acting classes, and I started making friends in the acting community. And, of course, I lied to him about what I did for a living.
Of course.
It became a joke. What do you do for a living, Brett? Oh, I'm a fraud consultant. That's what I told him. I just didn't tell him what side of the fraud equation I was on.
And let me just interject something. For those of you who didn't catch the episode where we talked about how you and I met.
Oh, yeah.
We're next door neighbors, and he gave me a business card, and I look up his website, and it says most wanted, and I'm thinking, okay, well, that's a gimmick to get business. Yeah, okay. Yep. Well, I guess it is a gimmick to get business, but it's the truth.
But it was the truth.
All right, I'm sorry. Go.
Yeah, so
tell me more.
I had told these people that, you know, I was a fraud consultant. I worked to prevent fraud. You know, I didn't tell them I was the guy who consulted people on how to commit fraud while I was doing it myself. So had what I called were friends, but I was lying to them at the same time. So I get it in my head. I was like, you know, Susan's gone. This is 4 months later. I'm like, Susan's gone. I'm ready for another girl. No dates. I don't know where to go to get a date. So I'm 34, and I'm like, strip club.
Works every time, I guess. So, huh?
You know, they're pretty at strip clubs. I'd never been to a strip club before. So I start looking I get online, because I'm that guy that looks for everything online. I get online, and I start searching for strip clubs, and I start searching for, now, which strip clubs have the strippers that have sex? That's what I'm interested in. So the one I settled on was not the best strip club in the city, of course. It was the low-level one. A place called Joe's Roundup was what it was called. So I walked into Joe's Roundup. There were 2 girls there. 2 girls. And Joe's Roundup was, the entire establishment was probably 30 feet wide, 40 feet deep, was how big it was. And so I walked in, bellied up to the bar. By this point, I'm drinking. You know, I've learned to drink by this point. And I ordered, my drink of choice was a White Russian. And I got that from the Big Lebowski. I was like, if the dude can drink it, by God, Brett can drink it. Let's start with the White Russian. So I belly up at the bar. I was like, White Russian. This old lady behind the bar, I forgot what her name was. She was like, we don't have that. I was like, well, what do you got? Beer only. Well, I don't drink beer. I don't know anything about beer. And I was like, well, give me a beer. What do you want? I was like, I don't know what's any good. And she was like, what? And I was like, well, give me something. So she gives me a Michelob Ultra. That's what she gives me. So about this time, this blonde, one of the 2 dancers, there was an African-American dancer. Her name was Juno. And there was a blonde dancer. Her stage name was Faith. So Faith comes over and sits down next to me. starts talking. She's like, you want to buy me a drink?
You want to buy me a drink?
Yeah.
I knew that was coming.
I was like, yeah, I'll buy you a drink. I said, what do you want? So she tells the bartender something. The bartender gives her this cocktail. Now, this cocktail is $40.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking, I'm like, that's $40? She's like, yeah, that's what drinks are for the girls. And I'm like, that's pretty high. And she's like, well, you wanted to buy me a drink. I was like, yeah. She's like, would you like to go in the private area? And I was like, where's the private area? So she points to this little booth with a curtain on it. She's like, we can go back there. And I was like, yeah. It's like, let's do that. And she's like, well, how much time do you want? And I was like, how much time can I get with you? And she's like, well, if you buy a bottle, you get until the bottle's done, at least 2 hours. And I'm like, tell you what, let's do the bottle. Well, the bottle was a bottle of Corbel champagne, $400. So I'm like, okay. So give the $400. She and I, her name was Elizabeth. We head back there, and we ended up talking for 2 hours. Now, I didn't understand that I didn't know anything about the strip club environment or the people who frequent strip clubs. I thought I was an anomaly. It turns out that a lot of men, the only thing they want to fucking do is talk.
Yeah.
And I was one of them. All right? So I go back and I start talking with Elizabeth. And she's sitting there drinking. I don't drink any of that crap. She drinks the entire bottle. And we talk for about 2.5 hours. And she's filling me up. Not physically, but trying to figure out how much money Brett Johnson's got. What kind of car you got? What kind of watch is that? Oh, it's an Omega. What kind of Omega is that? Oh, what kind of shoes you got? She's filling me out. Where do you live? Oh, you live on Folly Beach. Do you own a house out there? Oh.
That's a lovely little island.
It's a great island. It's a great island. Yeah. So I leave that night. Now, that was the first time I'd ever walked into a strip club. I leave that night, and I've got Elizabeth on my mind. You know, because she's a good-looking girl. She's a good-looking girl. I was 34. She was 23 at that point. So that's the first time I walked into the strip club, and I walked back in a week later. And I asked if Elizabeth was there, and of course she is. There's only 2 dancers there. So I was like, let me talk to her. She comes over, and I was like, look, I said, second time I've been to a strip club is tonight. I said, I don't plan on coming back in here. I'd like to know if you'd like to go out to dinner with me. So she looks at me. She's like, well, I can't go to dinner. I'm working. I was like, well, lunch? She's like, let's go to lunch. I was like, all right, you pick the place. So she picks this place called Rue de Jean, French restaurant. I'm like, okay. So I go back and I tell my supposed friends in the theater business, I've got a date. They're like, outstanding, you've got a date. Where'd you meet her? I lied about that. I didn't want her to know I'd met a stripper. Then the next question, where are you taking her for lunch? I'm like, Rue de Jean. What is that? And JC, my buddy, he looks at me, he's like, you're taking her to Rue de Jean. I'm like, yep. He's like, she picked that or you picked that? I was like, she picked that. And he's like, take your wallet with you. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, it's not the most expensive, but it's expensive. I'm like, how expensive? He's like, you gonna be drinking? I was like, more than likely. He's like, probably run you $300-400. I was like, what are they selling over there? And he's like, that's what Charleston Mills run if you pick a good restaurant. I was like, $300 to $400. He's like, at least that's what you're going to spend. I was like, fine. So I ended up meeting Elizabeth. This is like 3 days later. Met her at Rue de Jean before she went to work. And I spent, I think it's like $375, something like that. And we started dating. And I guess I got it in my head, Ken, that I loved her. Pretty quickly.
The stepping stone relationship.
Yeah. I needed somebody to fill that gap.
Yeah.
And I got it in my head that I loved her. She of course was. She was a very damaged person. She was. She didn't want to be intimate. or physical or anything else like that. And I kept thinking that, if I kept investing in that relationship, if I just waited it out, that it'd work out all right. So, of course, it started where that first manifested was, I love these purses. I love these purses. Mm-hmm. And, I was married to Susan. Susan was from Eastern Kentucky. We didn't know what an expensive purse was. We didn't know what, expensive shoes. An expensive purse to us was a Coach purse. That's $200. All right, so when Elizabeth mentioned, I really like this Jimmy Choo purse, I'm like, well, shit, I can buy you a purse. So I had told another one of my theater friends, I think I'm really falling in love with this girl, and, I'm thinking about buying her this purse. And she's like, well, what kind of purse is it? And I tell her, she's like, well, that's an expensive purse. And I was like, yeah, I figured that. And then her name was Heather. Heather was like, if you really love her, why not? You've got the money, don't you? And I was like, yeah, I've got the money. She's like, well, why not? So I go and spend $2,500 for a purse. Third date in. So met her at Rue de Jean again. Told Elizabeth, I was like, I got something for you. She's like, yeah. And I was like, yeah. Well, I didn't understand the stripper mentality of that's normal too. They find somebody they can milk and get this shit from them. So I give her this $2,500 Jimmy Choo purse, and of course I'm sure Elizabeth at that point sees dollar signs. So we start talking even more at that point, and it becomes this circular thing of me doing expensive meals, gifts, $1,000 shoes, $2,000 purses, blah 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 blah, until I get to the point, and she's not. I mean, we're having lunch and everything, but we're not making out, we're not having sex, anything else like that. And of course, I'm getting a little concerned at this point. I'm like, I'm emotionally attached to this woman, and nothing's going on, Brett. What the hell? Mm-hmm. So I'm like, and it becomes that thing of, I just got to keep investing. If you keep it going, Brett, you'll win her over. So it gets to be it's her birthday at this point, and I tell her I love her. And, of course, she gets real happy about that. I ended up moving her in my house. Now, she's still stripping. I moved her in my house. She did tell me she loved me. Has sex with me that night. I tell her I love her. All right?
Works every time.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And she's still stripping, though. Right. Well, what happens is
girl's got to make a living.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
she wouldn't come home from stripping. The bar would close at, I think, like 3 a.m., something like that. She wouldn't show up until 8 o'clock in the morning. And usually that showing up at 8 o'clock in the morning meant her calling me, telling me to come and get her, that she could not drive home. And she'd be in a parking lot someplace sitting in the car and literally couldn't drive home. So I'm like, something's going on there. So I bring her home one day, and she goes straight to bed. And I'm looking at her purse, and I was 34. In my entire 34 years of life, I had never searched through a woman's purse in my entire life. But her purse is there, and I'm like, by God, I'm going to find out what the hell is going on with this. Go through her purse and find cocaine. And I had never seen cocaine in my life at that point. But I found the straw coated with cocaine and everything, and when I had moved her out of her apartment into my house, my initial plan was to hire movers to do that. So I went to her apartment to see how much stuff was there, and she had a dog, had a pit bull. And when I walked in the apartment, it was a complete wreck. The dog had defecated throughout the place, had urinated all over the place and everything else. You talk about a roach infestation. There were roaches literally all over everything. And I was embarrassed to hire movers to come in to do it.
Yeah.
So I did it myself. Cleaned the apartment, steamed the rugs myself, moved all of her furniture out, fumigated it, everything else, because I didn't want people to know the way she was living and it be associated with me. So I did all that myself. And when I was cleaning, I saw all these straws. And I told myself at that time, I was like, well, I knew it was Coke, but I was like, oh, that's just people she's having over, so
Short straws, not
yeah,
the kind
yeah,
you stick
short
in a cup.
cut off straws.
Not McDonald's straws.
Right,
Okay.
right. So, of course, when I find that in her purse with Coke in there, it breaks me, man. I mean, she's in there asleep in the bed, and I'm like, she's a cokehead. Well, that's not enough for me. I have to find out exactly who Elizabeth is. So I get back online, and there was a site, and I think that site's probably still up to date. It's called USA Sex Guide, where you could actually go through and read their post on different strip clubs or escorts or anything else in your city. So I pull up strip club section and start going through looking for her strip club, find it, and find posts about her where she's selling herself for Coke. And it tells exactly what she does for that Coke. So I'm sitting there reading all that. So, of course, I'm sitting here in tears and everything else, that my girl is not only a cokehead, but she's a prostitute. So I go in and wake her up. I'm sitting there crying. I was like, look, man, I said, I found this cocaine in your bag. And I didn't mention the prostitute stuff to her. I was like, I found this in your bag, and I can't have that. And she started crying, and she's like, it's not what you think it is. Well, of course, I know it is, because I've already read all that bullshit.
Yeah.
But I don't tell her that. I don't want to confront her with all that. And I was like, well, I just can't have this. And she's like, I'll never do it again. All right. About three days later, she disappears again. 7:30 in the morning. Calls me. Come get me. I can't make it home. It's like, all right. So before I go and get her, I sat down and wrote her a letter. Left it on the bed. Go and get her. Bring her back to the house. Take her in the bedroom. Tuck her in the bed. Put the letter next to her. I was like, look, I'm going to Columbia, South Carolina today. I'll be back tonight. You got a letter here for you. And that letter basically said, if you can't stop Coke, don't be here when I get back tonight. So I came back that night, I guess 10 or 11 o'clock, and she had quit her job. And after that, she didn't use cocaine anymore. Did not. But here's the thing. The addict has to replace it with something.
Yeah, replaced with sex?
Nope. Did not. So what it became was Elizabeth, she could not be intimate unless she was completely wasted. So instead of snorting Coke, it became alcohol. Massive amounts of alcohol.
Yeah.
That's what that was. And for her to be at the least bit intimate with me, she had to be passing out. Literally passing out. If I touched her, if you put a hand on her shoulder, tried to kiss her or anything else, it was screaming at me. Don't. And that was a relationship. Was that it got she kept wanting to go back to strip clubs and stuff like that, and I'd always say no. No. And of course I lied to her about what I did for a living too. I'm a fraud consultant, and I got it in my head that if I could just keep her mind off of drugs, she'd be all right. And the way I wanted to keep her mind off of drugs, whatever she wants is exactly what I'll give her.
Mm-hmm.
So that became every single week $2,000 to $3,000 on a purse, $1,000 on a pair of shoes, every single night, and I mean every single night, because I used to eat at the house a lot. I cook pretty well, so I used to fix my own meals. I'd just go out to a restaurant occasionally. Well, that became every single night high dollar dinners. So every night was $400 to $700 for dinner, and that was my life all of a sudden. And she wanted to go to strip clubs. I refused to do that. I didn't have any need for that. I had who I wanted at the house, and that was the life I had of that. I got to the point. So the last episode we did, I talked about how ShadowCrew got busted.
Right.
Okay. So I meet Elizabeth. This is in early 2004. ShadowCrew, I retire from ShadowCrew April of 04. I'm with Elizabeth, and I'm not breaking the law, because Elizabeth gets to the point where I guess I become that kind of rock for her. So she's not doing coke, but she's afraid to be left alone. She doesn't want to be alone at all. And I will not violate the law while she's with me.
Right.
So I'm spending a lot of money on her. A lot. One time she wanted to buy jeans. So I'm like, sure, sweetheart, let's go get you a pair of jeans. Where do you want to go? I want to go to Saks Fifth Avenue. Okay. I never purchased anything at Saks before. So we walk into Saks. I go over to the men's section. I'm looking at shirts at $375 a piece. I'm like, that's a lot of money for a shirt. I look across the way to the women's section, and Elizabeth is over there at the jeans counter, and it's like a conveyor belt. She's just slamming one pair of jeans on top of another. Ends up like 10 pair. I walk over, and it's this brand 7 for All Mankind, $225 a pair. I'm like, that's the jeans you want. And of course, I'm like, sure, sweetheart, whatever you want. So I'm going through money like it's going out of style. The problem is that most of my money has been laundered over to Estonia. I've got a bankroll in the United States that's supposed to do me for the rest of the year. The rest of it is overseas. Well, that's supposed to do me the rest of the year. I go through that in the space of 2 to 3 months because we're spending like that. Not only that, but some weekends I'll withdraw, say, $10,000 or $11,000 from the bank, and then Monday morning won't have any money and nothing to show for it and no idea where it went because we spent a lot of money on drinks, stuff like that. And playing big shot. We go into a dance club and get the VIP booth, and get the $300 of champagne bottles over and over and over like that. So I go through all the stateside money. I'm not violating the law because Elizabeth is with me basically 24/7 at this point. I guess that's part of the addict mentality too once you start recovering. ShadowCrew makes the front cover of Forbes. And then the Secret Service sweep in October 26th and bust the site. And here I am in Charleston watching John Ashcroft, the Attorney General, talk about the site that I built on CNN. And I'm sitting there going, this is not good.
But it made you a star.
Well, yeah, star.
Sort of.
And the thing is I lived my life up until that point being nomadic. If something was going south, I could pick up everything and move to another area. Elizabeth stopped that. She was that rock for me all of a sudden. Those ties could not leave with her. She didn't know what I did for a living. She thought I was a legitimate person. And I had to keep up that facade at the same time. So I went through all my stateside money. I hadn't been engaging in tax return identity theft because she was with me. I couldn't very well break the law and then go withdraw all that money while she was there. So I go through all the stateside money I've got. ShadowCrew gets busted as tax season is ending. Tax season, you can't file returns after October 15th. ShadowCrew gets busted October 26th. So can't go tax fraud. Can't go into credit cards because that's online. ShadowCrew had just been busted. I didn't know who to trust anymore. Guess what? The only avenue I have left? Paper. Paper. That one thing that I have preached my entire life not to run. You do not do checks. You fucking idiot. If you do checks, you're guaranteed to go to prison. That was the only avenue I had. And I needed the money because I couldn't get it from overseas, send it back to me. It was all over there. So I start running counterfeit cashier's checks. Elizabeth wanted so I start buying bullion and cashing out bullion. I had a coin dealer in Charleston that would buy anything that I brought him. And he got a good deal on it. I got a good deal on it. So I was fencing everything through him. Elizabeth wanted a Tiffany engagement ring. That's what she wanted. And I'm all about giving her what she wanted. So I pay for a Tiffany engagement ring, $20,000, counterfeit cashier's check. Have it sent, buy it through eBay, pick it up from a UPS driver at a drop address. Give the UPS driver the counterfeit cashier's check. That's how I was getting the bullion and coin collections as well. I had a series of drops throughout South Carolina that I was paying for everything with counterfeit cashiers through COD orders.
Right.
So what happens is of course, because I'm in the same area, I can't very well go to North Carolina or Georgia or any place else because Elizabeth is with me. They know that some idiot, probably Brett Johnson, Gollum Fun, is in South Carolina running checks. For some reason, he's not leaving the area of South Carolina. He's there. So let's start looking at all these COD orders for high dollar items coming in. Find out what's coming through. We know he's doing bullion. We know he's doing rings. What can we get him on? So that's how I get caught. The way I actually got caught, I didn't have the money to buy the wedding rings. I certainly didn't have it for the engagement ring, so I stole that. She wanted Tiffany wedding rings.
Of course.
Of course. So I find a couple of Tiffany wedding rings on eBay, scam the people into sending them to me COD. Elizabeth, like I said, she didn't know what I did for a living. So that morning, I'd been telling her, I've got to go pick up some packages. You know, they've got some stuff being sent in. I'll be back in a few hours. And that's how I was able to get away long enough to do that. So told her I was going to go pick up some packages. I'd be back in an hour and a half. She didn't hear from me for about 12 hours. So what happens is I go to this drop address that was at the same apartment complex I used to be at.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew what time UPS was running. So I'm kind of touring, around waiting for the UPS driver and everything. So I end up coming out of the neighborhood, see the UPS driver, stop him, get out. I was like, hey, you got a package for me? He's like, yeah, what's your name? And I tell him the name. He's like, I got to deliver it at the address. I'm like, what? It's like, yeah, I can't give it to you here. I have to deliver it at the actual address. And I'm like, okay, fine. I'll see you at the address in a minute. He's like, okay. So I drive down to the address. UPS pulls up. I get out of the car, walk up to him. I was like, now, can I get my package? He's like, yeah, you got an ID. So I showed him the ID. He's like, that's $17,000. Hand him a cashier's check. He hands me the box. I turn around. There's the FBI and the Charleston Police Department, guns drawn. You're under arrest. Turns out there's about 30 of them in the parking lot, waiting on Brett Johnson. The UPS officials are there, everybody else. They arrest me. And they didn't even know who I was to begin with. I had the ID. I had an ID in the name Brett Johnson. They were like, who are you really? I was like, I'm Brett Johnson. No, who are you really? I'm like, I'm Brett Johnson, damn it. So it took them about 15, 20 minutes for them to realize I was Brett Johnson. They take me at that point in time. Cybercrime was not on many law enforcement's radar. So they didn't have any place to interview cyber criminals. So they took me to the place where they interview drug people. That's what they did. And the agent's name, her name was, her FBI agent, her name was Cynthia McCants, was her name. So they take me in there, sit me down in the interrogation room. There's her, there's a Charleston PD guy, and I'm sitting across the table from him. Cynthia's like, we'd like to show you a few things first. I'm like, okay. So she opens up this folder, and in the folder, there's only one sheet of paper. She takes out that sheet of paper, slides it across the desk to me. It's a photocopy of a fake driver's license I had used a year earlier. And she's like, does that look familiar? And I was like, yeah. It's a little bit heavier, but that's me. As soon as I said that, door of the interrogation room opens. 2 Secret Service agents walk in. They sit down, look at me. We'd like to talk to you about some counterfeit credit cards. And I'm like, oh, shit.
Yeah.
So I don't talk to them about anything. They want to search the house. Elizabeth, at this point, again, she doesn't know where I am. And I figure she's been calling by this point. I tell the agents, I was like, look, you can search the house. I'll sign off on the search tonight as long as I can go to the house with you. And they agreed to that. Well, they had already been cased. They had sent a couple agents around to look around the house and everything. They'd said that, hey, there's only a girl in there with a dog. So, signed off on the paperwork. They escort me down there. I get to the house, and there's probably parked outside, because Elizabeth was never good about looking outside. There's probably 15 cop cars parked outside. All the neighbors, of course, are, what the hell's going on? They take me up at the lead to the door. There's probably 30 agents, local, state, and federal law enforcement officers behind me. All right? And I'm knocking on the door, ringing the doorbell. Elizabeth comes to the door. She sees all that. And I'm like, look, put the dog up. She's like, what the hell's going on? I was like, put the dog up. I'll explain it afterwards. Put the dog up. So she puts the dog in a cage, and we come in, and that's where Elizabeth finds out that her fiance, because by this point I'm her fiance. I had to ask her to marry me. She had agreed to it. That was February 8th of 2005. The wedding date was February 26th, 2005. So she finds out that Brett Johnson's a criminal. Right.
All right, so that was episode number 83 of the Brett Johnson Show, an Anglerfish podcast flashback, looking for love in all the wrong places. And yes, I have absolutely been guilty of that. No doubt about it. Look, if you like the show, please subscribe. If you don't like the show, please subscribe. I can use all the subscribers I can get. I don't care where you subscribe. It can be Spotify, it can be iTunes, it can be Amazon, it can be YouTube, wherever you want to go. But please subscribe. I need those numbers boosted up. I'm trying to get this show to the point where it's making some money. If it doesn't make any money, guess what? I'm still going to keep doing the show the way that I want to do it. If you've noticed, we've had some changes. I've had some interviews coming on. I continue to do the solo show as well. We're trying to make things more appealing to a wider audience while keeping the core of what this show has been as well. And hopefully that's going to work out. We'll find out. But please do subscribe. Leave me a comment someplace. Send me an email if you want to. Find me on LinkedIn. Find me on Twitter. But please let me know what you like, what you don't like about the show. Complain, bitch, moan, complain, whatever you want to do. I'm fine with that, and I'll probably respond to it as well, and probably not in a, well, maybe in a hateful manner, but usually not. Anyway, my name is Brett Johnson. We're going to close out this show. How do we close it out? We close it out the same way every single time. Stay safe out there. Stay secure. Stay vigilant. More importantly, understand this is the Brett Johnson Show. At the end of the day, just do the right damn thing. I'm Brett Johnson. Thank you for listening. Until next time.